All right, thanks everybody for sticking with us here. We are going to get started in just a minute. This last workshop is the general topics. This is basically the catch-all for a discussion that didn't necessarily fit neatly into any of the other workshop topics. To give folks an opportunity to bring up those issues and have conversations on other things that we hadn't anticipated or hadn't heard about previously. Like I say, we will get started in a minute. I'd just like to see if folks online can hear us, and if you can, you should be muted, but if you press *6, that should unmute you, and if you could just say hello that you can hear us, that would be really helpful.
Hello, yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, looks like everybody is here. Everything is working. So again, thanks everyone for coming and sticking. For those of you who've been here from Monday, thanks for sticking around and being with us for all these workshops. Appreciate all the investment, time, and energy to come and give us your thoughts and feedback and help us understand your industry and how the impacts of these regulations are going to affect you and your business. We're going to run this workshop very much like we ran the other ones. Very quickly, though, logistics for those online. We've muted everybody. If you want to speak, you can use the little raise your hand feature on the interface, and we'll get to you. If you don't want to talk, you can just type in message using the questions feature, and we'll read them out into the room and answer them. We just ask that if you do speak, go ahead and re-mute yourself afterwards by pressing *6 so we don't get a lot of background noise. Folks in the room, restrooms are out the door to the left all the way down, another left, and they're on your right. If we have an evacuation or a fire drill or something like that, we go out the stairs, or out the doors, down the stairs, out the front door, and across the street to Cesar Chavez Park. Find one of us up here and we'll lead you the right direction. Our agenda for the meeting, I'm going to give a few opening remarks. We're actually not going to really review major topics because this is just an open discussion for everything that didn't fit into the other topics. But it will be an open discussion, so we want to encourage people to talk, to give their impressions, their thoughts, give us examples, your questions and concerns about the regulations. Like we've said at some of the previous workshops, we really like to have the examples. We want to know exactly what it is that what we're doing is going to affect you, and if something doesn't look like it's going to work, let us know what you think might be a good change to make it work better, because we really do want to make this work well for everybody. And then towards the end, when we're finished with our conversation, we'll finish with next steps. So a little bit of the background. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. The AB 901 was the legislature's solution to help provide CalRecycle with the information necessary to help us reach some of our other legislative goals, most particularly the 75% diversion goal by 2020. As we've said at previous workshops, getting to the 50% diversion has taken a fair amount of effort, but getting from 50 to 75% is going to take almost exponentially more effort, as all of the obvious and easy to achieve goals have sort of already been taken. In order for us to most effectively and economically allocate our resources at CalRecycle to achieve those goals, we need to understand how the infrastructure works. We need to know where material flows and how it moves through the system, not just the historic disposal information that we've been getting, but also for recycling and composting information as well. So that's really what 901 does. It expands the reporting to include disposal and recycling and composting, moves everything into online reporting, and also cuts out the sort of the middleman of the counties consolidating data and has facilities report directly with CalRecycle. We're finishing up our informal workshops. We've had 2 rounds previous to this, and this is the last workshop of this round of workshops. This really helps us scope the regs and makes it so that when we start the formal rulemaking process, the whole package is a little bit closer to being complete and vetted through the stakeholders. That process is governed by the Office of Administrative Law, or OAL. It provides for strict timelines and procedures, but has a lot of opportunity for folks to provide comments and thoughts on the regulations. We're hoping to start late 2016, and the process takes roughly a year, depending on the details of that rulemaking process. And so we're hoping to finish sometime towards the end of 2017. We'll be developing the online reporting system in parallel with that rulemaking process so that it's up and ready to go as soon as the rulemaking process is finished. All that being said, let's jump right in. We do have a few sort of general areas that folks might have some thoughts on that didn't fit into the other workshop topics, including things like registration, who has to register versus who reports, how do you register? Some questions that we did receive were, how are we going to port data from other databases on reporting entities that might already have to report under, say, Swiss, into the new system, how we're going to coordinate with other CalRecycle databases and reporting obligations to make sure that we make this as easy as possible. We don't have people having to report the exact same information to two different databases within CalRecycle. The reporting timelines, how long after the end of a quarter does a reporting entity have to finalize their report? We also received a question about whether you're allowed to take material to facility that isn't a registered facility with a DDRS number, defining end user, and then for us, a little discussion about what and how the industry is tracking already so that we understand. As we've said at previous workshops, we want to make this as easy as possible. We want to get good quality information, but if we can take advantage of information that's already being tracked and managed by the industry in the form that they're tracking and managing it, then that makes it easier for everybody. We don't want to include more new tracking obligations than we absolutely have to. So let us know how things are being tracked, what kinds of information you're already getting, so that we can make sure that we tailor as much as possible to run parallel with those existing efforts. So that being said, we'll take questions online as well as in the room. If you're in the room, just raise your hand. There are wireless mics around. Just grab one of them, push the button on the side until it blinks green, and we'll take your question or comment. Everything online to start out?
Carol Parker asks, what is a targeted material? Targeted for what? Targeted how? Please define the term, especially in the rules.
Thank you, Carol. You know, when we were first putting together the language, I'm not sure where targeted came from, but we've heard since then that perhaps that's not the most appropriate word. Targeted just means it's a whole product that we're planning on including as a reporting category for 901. So we're including sort of pieces of things like plastic, like PET or PVC or polypropylene, as well as paper and newsprint and metal, aluminum, etc. But there was some thought about including whole products, not broken down, to track the flow of them before they get taken apart and broken down. So that's what we mean. We'll certainly change the terminology, so it'll be materials and products probably rather than targeted products. Either way, it doesn't change the overall intent that there are some things, some flows that we want to track that are not individual materials, but rather whole products. And that's what we're getting at with those. So we're, the list that we had, and we talked about it at the last workshop about what's included and what's not, what material types and products. There's a list, I can't recall how many of them there are, maybe 8 or so, of things that we identified as being whole products that we feel it's beneficial to be able to track the movement of them through the recycling infrastructure via 901. So I don't know if that answered your whole question, but if you don't, you can type a follow-up.
I have just, Aaron Danoff, Children's Solid Waste. I have kind of a clarifying question. I was clear on this earlier, and then through the course of this, I kind of muddied my understanding. So when we collect our residential green waste, there's a fair amount of contamination, which we sort out, and then we send the clean green waste to compost. But that residual that comes out of the green waste gets mixed in with our other MSW, which is up at the transfer station. When that MSW goes out to landfill, are we going to need to give you? Are we going to need to differentiate between what's residual and what was originally MSW? And how do the jurisdiction origins figure into all that?
Right. So the way I would envision that, so as a transfer station, material comes in, some of it's solid waste that's going to ultimately go to a landfill, and some of it's recyclable and or compostable material that's going to be sent out for recycling and or composting. All three of those flows are sort of reported as outbound flows. So you will report everything that leaves to disposal facilities, tons, jurisdiction of origin, source sector, everything that leaves for recycling facility, and everything that leaves to composting facility by tons and material type. But since it's all sort of part of the transfer station activities, you wouldn't have to say we received sort of this contaminated organic material that we separated out, some that went out to composting and others that got mixed in with all this other municipal solid waste that went to disposal.
It would all just be MSW or compostables.
Exactly.
However, when you're composting, you still have to tell from the composting operation how much residual left the composting operation.
We don't actually compost. We send it out to another facility.
Right, yeah. Then no, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I actually have two questions, but I'll start with the broker question. Can you please describe how you imagine a broker might report and what they're going to be reporting to you? Let's say if they're selling a product either in-state, out-of-state, or overseas, what level of detail are you expecting from the brokers? And at this point, what kind of communication have you had with the broker community about this reporting?
Good question. Brokers are a little bit of an odd category in general, but for the purposes of 901 reporting, particularly so. So there's really kind of two large groups of brokers in our mind. The group of brokers that essentially just facilitate a sale, right? I know that this person's selling a material and this person wants to buy the material. I kind of put them together and I take a cut as it happens. But I never take the material. I never own the material. I never have it in any of my warehouses or trucks. I never rent a rail car that has the material in it. I'm just facilitating the sale and taking a cut of it. In that situation, I wouldn't report anything because the selling facility, the outbound facility, says that they sent material to this receiving facility, and that's all taken care of. The whole flow is done. If, on the other hand, I as a broker buy material from you and either put it in my warehouse or put it on one of my trucks, or I rent a rail car and you put it on the rail car, and all you know is you sold it to me as the broker. And as that truck's on the road, or as that rail car is going down the tracks, or as it's sitting in my warehouse, I find somebody to buy it and I sell it to them, then I have to report just like any processor would, because I'm handling recyclable materials. And that's really what the statute says. If you handle, broker, process, et cetera, it loops them all together as one sort of thing. So it doesn't matter if you're processing it or transporting it or holding it or handling it, it's all sort of together. So if I own it, if I have it and it's mine, and the MRF who sold it to me just knows they sold it to me, then I act just like a processor would. So I have to say I sold X number of tons of OCC to whoever I sold them to. So the reporting obligation would be exactly the same as if you were a processor, unless, again, you're in that sort of unique situation where you never touch it. You're just facilitating the sale. Does that answer the question? or do you have more?
Well, I'm interested in talking with my membership about how that works in terms of selling to the broker or this in between, whether or not what level of detail they know about the destination of the material. So thank you for that conversation. And then my other question, unrelated, is if a facility is sending a mixed load for further processing to a secondary or tertiary facility, I understand that you have the material streams maybe defined as mixed waste or mixed recyclables, but if we can kind of assume it's coming, let's just say mixed recyclable, but if there might be a higher contamination level in it, how are we going to be reporting this mixed recyclable or mixed waste if it's not going to a disposal facility, but is heading to a recycling facility, knowing that maybe it's at a level of contamination? It seems like you may want us to say if it's over 10%, it's mixed waste. But then is the assumption on that particular recycling load that you're giving jurisdiction of origin and source sector, given that, it's presumed that it's going to have some residual matter coming out of it? I think some more clarity on that would be good.
Yeah, I agree. We do need to make that a little bit more clear. What we are thinking about is if you're sending material out to a facility for processing and it's mixed materials, let's just take for a moment that we're not going to think about this threshold of how much is recyclable, how much isn't, but it's just mixed, right? It's just a big mix of heterogeneous materials that will have a category, whatever we call it, mixed materials, mixed recycles, whatever, was sent to, XYZ processing facility. Now, if it turns out that facility, based on how much residuals come out of their process as a whole, and they say to themselves, okay, based on the regulations, I have to report jurisdiction of origin for these residuals that are going to disposal at a landfill. If that's the case, now it's incumbent on me as a facility to gather that information from anybody who sends me material, whether it be a hauler collecting curbside or another MRF or whoever it is that's bringing them stuff, so that they can meet their reporting obligation for jurisdiction of origin on the residuals. Then they have to get that from people. If, based on their operations, they don't have to report jurisdiction of origin for the residuals, then they don't have anything. They don't have to ask that of either the haulers or of any other facility that's sending the material. We've got a few online questions, so we'll take a few of those and then we'll move back into the room.
A lot of people are asking, will these PowerPoints be published or any kind of summary documents from these sessions?
Yeah, we'll publish these PowerPoints. They were really, I think the most valid piece of these PowerPoints are the screenshot that you're seeing right now, just this list of topics. The rest of it is a little bit probably mostly useless, but we'll post them afterwards. We'll get them cleaned up and make sure that everything is good, and we'll post those up. We're not planning on posting summaries, but these are also being recorded, so we'll be posting the recordings as well. So if you didn't have an opportunity to see them, or if you want to listen back and hear what somebody had to say, some question that was asked or a response, those will be posted as well. I don't have a timeline exactly, but give us a few days or a week or something to get everything formatted and posted on the website. Let's take one more online and then we'll go here in the room.
Will the new system be operated in 2017 in beta form, or do we know of the issues with the new water board smart system?
I can't really comment on exactly how we're going to roll the system out, whether there's going to be a beta testing phase and how big that might be. But suffice it to say, there will be some period of time where we're educating people, teaching them how to use the system, training everybody. This is going to be new for everybody. It'll be sort of just format new for people who have been reporting under DRS, but it'll be a completely new for all the folks that have not had to report, all the recyclers and composters that have never had to report this kind of information. So this will be completely new for them. So we understand that it'll take quite a long time, a lot of effort on our part to make sure that people know how to use the system, know how to report accurately and correctly. But exactly the format that's going to take, I don't know.
And I would just want to add something. John Sitz, CalRecycle. For the disposal reporting system, we're asking everybody to keep doing reporting the way they're doing it until the new system rolls out. And I wouldn't expect a beta version or a final version before the beginning of 2018. That's the date that we're hoping, the first quarter of 2018, to be our first reporting period. I don't think it'd be feasible to have anything before that because we'll be in the regulatory process, and what's reported in the regs is kind of what drives what will be in the system.
And the second part of that question was whether we know about the water board's smart screen system. I don't know about it, but we can certainly look into it. And if the commenter can provide some thoughts on whether they think that's a good model or a bad model, that would help us to know whether we're looking for things to model ours against or things that we should try to stay away from. So that would be helpful. We got a comment here in the room.
I can guess that their comment on the smart system is it would be a opportunity for outreach on lesson learned on how to prevent errors of implementation. And it's had a lot of challenges getting into effect, and they had challenges getting the system up, and they're still having challenge getting data out. So it would be the opportunity to talk to a sister agency about lessons learned in the development of a system, I think. And I don't think users' opinions probably vary on that, but having heard some complaints about the system, I can add that. I wanted to bring up the reporting timelines here. I respect that the regulated waste industry that's kind of been regulated by CalRecycle traditionally has done quarterly reporting. You are about to reach out into manufacturing, processing, materials industries that are not the waste industry, capturing components of recycling that occur at those facilities. I think points have been brought up about your need to outreach to broad ranges of industry, and I agree with that based on where you seem to be defining recycling. I think there's a lot of unintended, unknowing people out there that potentially get captured into this system. In terms of the benefit of the use of tracking to a 75% recycling or potentially developing an incentive program over some long deliberative process, there's no reason an annual reporting for such reporters isn't a viable option for the board. It's not like you're tracking disposal costs and allocations of fees among jurisdictions and things of that nature. And so it just kind of seems to treat them at that quarterly impetus is extremely negative, especially when you're also telling them, hey, $500 a violation per day. And you're trying to incentivize recycling activities, which is the reuse of these materials by those industries. And you're just kind of adding a burden to that reuse. So I just would like to add that into that. You really have to, and I've sat here for 3 days precisely because I want to understand those waste issues, but you're going to be getting industries that are not the waste industry and pulling them into reporting their recycling activities in the state. And how you do that should be carefully conceived.
Appreciate that. Yeah, you know, we've thought about this a fair amount. You know, when we first started, we got quite a lot of feedback from folks thinking that this should be monthly reporting, and a number of people who actually said maybe once every 10 years might be a good number. And you know, we were looking, you know, a little bit towards one, what we've been used to, obviously, with the disposal reporting system, which is quarterly, but understanding that we are bringing in a whole group of new folks into the system that haven't been reporting under the DRS system or perhaps any system in the past, although a lot of them are reporting elsewhere at CalRecycle. You know, everybody who deals with the beverage container program reports to CalRecycle through DOR for the beverage container program. So that's a lot of the plastics, a lot of the metals, a lot of the glass industry is reporting already through that. But you know, separate from that, you know, we've looked at the reporting timelines that a number of our other obligations are, and some of them are annual and some of them are quarterly. You know, we'll chat a little bit more with the folks that deal with processors in other industries, because like I said, we do touch most of the recycling industry in one way or another already. Some of them have to report a little and some of them have to report quite a lot. But we'll see what sort of makes sense based on what what they're already having to report. But appreciate your thoughts, and we certainly don't want to create a system where it's so burdensome that people want to get out of the recycling industry, because that's what we're all about, is trying to encourage people to recycle, encourage the infrastructure to grow. But of course, we also have obligation to collect this information.
Yeah, I think my point is they don't necessarily see themselves as part of the recycling industry. They see themselves as being in this industry, and as certain part of that, they may be taking in some materials that you consider recycling, and it's a very small percentage. They've got natural materials that they can use instead, and you're adding a significant system over the top of them in terms of a new administrative tracking layer, new accountability layers, and potential liability. And depending on how significant that component of their business is and how necessary they consider it, they can go, I don't need another headache, because businesses deal with a lot of tracking systems, and administrative systems may not seem burdensome to you as this is one system, but it's taken as one of dozens of systems that you're worrying about one person reporting in.
Right.
And it is significant for industry, because you can't hire dozens of people to meet all those tracking needs. So it really does matter.
We realize that it matters. This is every part of the industry that we regulate has multiple, sometimes dozens of reporting obligations, whether it be to CalRecycle or the Department of Food and Agriculture or DTSC or US EPA or all of the above, their county, their city, and on the list goes. It's something that we are aware of, and again, why we are working to try to make this as least burdensome as possible. And the reporting period is a area that we can sort of look at again. We have some online questions, so we'll go to those and then we'll come back into the room.
Deidre Dingman says, I was unable to find where in AB 901 it provides statutory authority for adopting regulations that require operators to report source sector.
So source sector is something that you're right, is not explicitly described in 901. It's part of the origin information. So as we have material going to disposal, we're getting information about the origin of that material. Some of that is the city, and some of that is the sector, residential or commercial. And this is very much in line with the kinds of information that we've been collecting under the old DRS system as well. So I don't know, John, if you have anything you want to add to that comment.
I think some of the impetus for it is the mandatory commercial recycling.
Thank you, John. Deidre, if you have any follow-up, you can type that in. Do we have another one online?
Kimberly Shibley, we process source-separated food waste in the transfer station. It is not MSW and goes to an AD facility. I'm confused as to how to report this because it's not MSW, but is in the transfer station because that's where the equipment fit. It's not a MRF.
Right, so transfer stations and MRFs are a little bit of somewhat of a special category. Not so much, it's just that we're kind of lumping them all together. So as a transfer station, you have sort of an obligation to report anything that goes to a disposal facility for disposal. So anything that you send out to a landfill for disposal, you have to tell us how much went that direction. If you send material offsite for recycling, whether to a MRF or to a processor of some sort, you report how much and what materials went to recycling facility. If you have material going offsite for composting, including anaerobic digestion, you tell us how much by tons and material type went offsite for composting, even in an AD facility, by material type. So in this example, transfer station would, among their other reporting obligations, would also say X number of tons of food waste went to AD facility ABC for processing. And that would be your reporting obligation as it relates to the food portion of your material stream.
Another question from Deidre Dingman. Yesterday's discussion about confidentiality of records led me to believe that CalRecycle had to treat jurisdictions just the same as the public. But since I've reread AB 901 and found that the legislature actually amended PCR section 4181.5 so that it now states that the department may provide information to jurisdictions aggregated by company upon request, even though that level of detail is not public information.
Deidre, can you? Oh, I think we have our attorney here is looking up the PRC reference that you've just quoted here. So you'll have to give us a moment just to look it up so that we can have an opportunity to look at what it says and get you some thought. But thanks for providing that, particularly with the statutory reference, because that makes it easier for us to look it up. While they're doing that, we'll move on to. Let me see if there's a question in the room, and then we'll move back online. Larry, you got the mic. Go ahead.
Well, since somebody brought up the MRF question, I mean, I think that definition needs a lot more defining, because I'm looking at it right now and about hand separation by types of materials or even mixed. In my mind, in the extreme, that could include bins in a parking lot where somebody puts bottles here, cans there, and newspapers there. That would meet that definition of a MRF.
The definition right now includes the conveyor belt.
Or hand processing.
It should, I think we amended that in the latest draft, that the non-public draft, but we have addressed that issue. It does include conveyor belt.
Do you have to have a conveyor belt in order to be a MRF?
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
Depends on what I have to do.
And I'll tell you that there's very little difference in reporting obligation between whether you're considered a MRF or not a MRF. The only difference is that if you are a MRF, you have to report all of the material going to landfill directly to CalRecycle. If you're not a MRF, you have to report all the material going to landfill to the landfill. Other than that, you still have to report all of the material going to landfill. You have to report all of the material leaving the facility for recycling, and you have to report all of the material leaving the facility for composting, no matter whether you're MRF or not. So it's really only whether you report it to us or you report it to the receiving facility.
So
and
all
that,
the recycling buyback centers that have a conveyor going into a hopper would have to report?
I'm sorry, say that again?
All the recycling centers in a parking lot would have a conveyor where things go into a bin would have to report?
So a parking lot recycling center that receives recycling material from the public that has a conveyor belt to take the material into a truck of some sort. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
You know, I guess I have to look at the description again, but I think it would depend on a couple of things. You know, I don't think that's the intent. So we might have to make an adjustment to include that, you know, there's additional materials. There's certainly always going to be a threshold. So if that facility only takes 5 tons of material during the quarter, then they wouldn't have to report no matter what they are called. But we should revisit that. You know, one on the one side, we'd like to know generally how much material those kinds of facilities manage, because if they fall out in our general threshold, then we don't have to go through this exercise. But if they fall above that threshold, then we want to find another way, because you know, parking lot recycling collection operations are not what we're intending to capture as MRFs.
But they may already be reporting under the beverage program.
That's true.
So I think it really needs getting a handle on all these other reports out there, and the more streamlining you do and the less duplication or even overlap. We've got enough problem with different reporting the same kind of information like household hazardous waste by different time periods for different reports. Just creates more and more work. And when you're requiring reports of any sort, that's not free. That takes staff time. It takes system changes. Computer changes are going to cost significant amounts of money. One of my counties mentioned $14,000 to make a computer change for reporting. I know one facility they wanted to put a simple line item in their bills was a $100,000 system change. So hopefully that kind of economic analysis gets taken into account in this process.
Certainly the economic analysis is a part that's required by the Office of Administrative Law. So we will be going through an economic analysis of how much it'll cost the regulated community to comply with the new rules.
Right, and the usual response on that in most regulations for local government on the financial impact is there's no impact because we can raise our fees. That's never been a satisfactory answer for local government. So I think hopefully look a little more in depth on this package.
Thank you. Let's go back to John for a response to Deidre.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I don't know if that's on. Yeah. Here, come over here.
I've killed another battery. Okay. Yeah, in the section B3, it does talk about the department may provide this information to jurisdictions aggregated by company upon request. The aggregated information other than that aggregated by company is public information. So there is a slightly more aggregated level that jurisdictions can get. Yesterday when we were talking about customer lists and specific companies and specific amounts shipped to different destinations, that's a level that isn't reached by this. And this section also only covers the recycling and composting side.
Thanks for that clarification, John. We got Chuck in the room, and then we'll go back online.
Chuck Helgett, Republic Services. Excuse me. First of all, just a quick observation. You've really got all this stuff in your brain, and I'm really somewhat amazed by how you can recite all this stuff. You really absorbed it well. I haven't. And I wouldn't have expected this from the first iteration, but this next iteration of the regs, it would really be helpful if you could put together, and John, I'm sure you can do this in 10 minutes, but some flow chart, some flow of the reporting so that I think all of us numbskulls can kind of follow what you expect from different types of facilities. And having those examples, I think, would really make it easier for us to comment, particularly during the formal process.
Sure. Yeah. We provided some of those flow charts at the last set of workshops, and we do intend to kind of continue adjusting those and changing them as the rules change and the reporting obligations and directions and everything change. And we'll be updating those and making sure that they stay current as the rules change. And we'll hopefully make them more and more useful as we continue to sort of work on them and get them put together. So we definitely plan to keep that up and provide some revised flow charts for folks.
The other two things I want to raise are more or less questions. There's a lot of discussion. I'm sorry I've been in and out of these meetings. There was a couple of other things going on this week, but you were discussing waste flows, and I didn't really get a clear sense of exactly what that meant. I mean, I keep coming back when I look at what we're doing with these regs to compliance with 75%, getting to a point where we're reporting the information adequately and efficiently to show that we've reached 75%. We don't have to worry about anything after that. But the waste flow question to me just doesn't quite fit into what I'm trying to understand better what you were getting at, or what you're getting at when you start talking about understanding better how waste flows.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying, just sort of correcting the first point, that the purpose of 901 is not a mechanism for us to track whether we have met the 75% diversion goal. It's not a sort of metrics-based reporting where, we're going to keep going until we can calculate out 75% from 901, and then we're done. What 901 is meant to do is to provide us the information about how the solid waste industry, the recycling industry, and the composting industry works, so that we can find effective solutions to get us to 75%.
I mean, I think having worked on 901, that I think we've got somewhat of a different view of that. But I mean, I respect where you're going, and I was being a little bit facetious about not doing anything more. But I think the driving force, and I think the intent sections cover that a bit, is that the main purpose for doing this is to understand the 75% compliance side of things.
Well, and I think that when you look at the recycling side specifically, we've got those 4 categories that I talk about. We want to know how much is going to end use for recycling and composting. That goes toward the 75% goal. The amount that's being exported, again, that's leaving the system, hopefully going toward recycling and contributing to the 75%. The residual disposal, which is the disposal side, which hopefully is not too big, and then the amount of material that's flowing between facilities. And that part we track to make sure that we aren't double counting things, and we can understand the regional flows when we're talking about capacities or the ability of the system to absorb more material, or we're looking at incentives or other policy kind of changes that might affect one region or one part of the state different than another. I think that in those aspects, flow information and getting an idea of the different materials can help in those aspects.
And John, I really appreciate that. It does help add clarity. I think on that last point is probably the one area where you and I, or many of us and you, will be kind of hammering and coming back and forth on each other, because there's, I guess, just kind of reiterate a point I made way back when this whole started, that this whole process started, is that this is a marketplace. And trying to get to where you're trying to get on that last point of waste flow is important. We want accuracy in reporting. We want legitimate numbers, those types of things. But at the same time, you need to, I think, get out and look at what the competitive environment is out there too. And that's where our sensitivities are going to be really coming up. And when it starts getting close to relaying customer information or information that could be of a competitive nature, then we're going to be pushing back. And I mean, that's you've heard us, and we've had a number of conversations about this, and I know you understand it, but it's one of the key points I think that you're going to keep hearing from us.
And that's understandable. That's, throughout this process, I've been saying, let's get really into the weeds, and when you give us comments, tell us about the parts that really give you heartburn, and give us some options about how to work around those. Somebody suggested, report things by category of end use if you really know that they're end users, and then if we need more information on a particular end use, we could come and look at the records to see, et cetera. Other people have made other suggestions as well, so that customer list is like one step away instead of in the report. Although I want to reassure folks that when we're talking about customer lists or customer information that's in the reports that we're getting, just because it's in the report that's submitted to CalRecycle doesn't make it public information. That's still confidential information that'll be locked down and not shared. We might share aggregated information by category or by region or something like that, but we're going to really take steps to keep that granular level confidential.
And I think just my last real quick question, it's a question actually to you more than anything, that, and going through this, I mean, obviously we're going to be developing comments, and from your perspective, what do you think your biggest information gaps are right now that we can help fill so that we can start focusing our attention on the things that are most important?
That's a good question. We have quite a few. We've sort of pulled a couple of them as we've had conversations, but some of the pieces that are really critical for us are the information about how material is currently being tracked and what kinds of categories. What do you call the material that you send out of your facility? If we get lists from people about how it's spec'd, if you use industry specs, or if you have your own particular specs that you're using in just your own company and nobody else uses them, how is the material leaving your facility? That would help us get a sense of what the universe of material leaving processing facilities is. And then information about particularly the kinds of information that you're having trouble with, about either we can't get this information because it doesn't exist or there's no mechanism to collect it, or we have this information but we're really worried about giving it to you. And again, pretty specific, I mean, you may have a situation where you're comfortable giving the name of somebody but not their address, or you're comfortable telling us how much went there but not the name of it. You're comfortable telling us all of the combined material that went to them but not differentiated by material type that went to that facility. Those kinds of things really get down into the weeds of this is the part that's really scary for us to give you, but this other thing that's kind of close would be perfectly fine. I'd be more than happy to give that to you. Because again, we want to find those pain points and relieve them if we can at all. And so, telling us where it hurts gives us an opportunity to see if we can find a solution of relieving that. John, do you have any more to add? And we can come up with more detailed list of data points that we'd like from folks and get it out to the group so that we can have some more detailed requests. But those are just the ones that jump to the top of my head.
Yeah, solutions is a good one. For as we mentioned before, in the draft regs, we have a couple areas where we say, you must use a reasonable method to do such and so, and that may include A, B, or C. And we've put some things in there that we think might be reasonable, but for specific situations like an unmanned transfer station or someone that just has an attendant there once in a while, or this kind of thing, maybe that situation's different for determining jurisdiction of origin, or it should have a different set of requirements or no requirements in relation to source sector. And both source sector and jurisdiction of origin are areas where we have, you must use a reasonable method, and here's a list. And I made the plea to please give us stuff to put on that list so that we can include it on the list, because at the bottom of the list, it's always going to say, or other reasonable methods approved by CalRecycle. But if it's already on the list, you don't have to worry about asking us if it's okay. It gives people certainty and more of a calm feeling that, what I'm doing is okay. I don't have to worry about it. And the material type discussion that Robert started with, I think is another really good one, because it will really help with the electronic system, because that's the other piece of this is, as you think about how will I comply with this, what will I do, there's going to be an electronic system. It'll be a lot easier to start typing in and have a pull down list or pop down list that auto fills a material type that's commonly used, instead of a field that says check plastic and then type in some descriptor that so we know what kind of thing you're dealing with. And there'll always be some capacity probably for adding some other one. But again, if it's there at the beginning, it makes it easier for everybody and saves everybody time and effort, so that it is less of a burden. Because we are really looking to say, we want to do these regulations in a way that is not a new tracking burden for people on the recycling and composting side in particular. It is just kind of a reporting burden, because we know there will be a burden to submit a report, but we don't want people to have to have a new set to track things. But if materials are leaving your facility, you know what that material is and you know where it's going. And if that kind of information is easy to provide, then you can do that. If there's some other level of detail that we're asking that makes that really complicated, where now you've got to start tracking something else, like if we said source sector on recycled materials, nightmare, whole new tracking thing, or jurisdiction of origin on recyclable materials. All right, that's again really messy. But think about how this recycling would work. And tell us, what parts give you heartburn? What parts are like, oh man, what are they thinking? Because you guys know better what's going to work and what's not going to work. And tell us about it.
Okay, we got a question over here. Is the mic on? Is it a green light?
It's flashing red.
There, it's green now.
Perfect.
Sorry. Greg Kester with CASA. We represent the wastewater sector and biosolids producers. And I apologize that I've been in and out of the meetings, and if I've missed this, I apologize. But a question, many of the wastewater plants in the state already report end uses of their biosolids to US EPA. I'm wondering what coordination you'll have with EPA. Is that something that we'll have to report again to CalRecycle, that sort of thing?
Yeah, thanks. So we had some conversation about wastewater treatment plants at one of our other workshops, or a couple of our other workshops. Generally speaking, if you're a wastewater treatment plant and all you do is wastewater treatment, meaning you're not taking any material from off-site except for the wastewater, and you're producing biosolids, and you're sending those biosolids to a landfill or to a compost facility or wherever, you are the generator of that material. And generators don't report under 901. So you wouldn't have a reporting obligation to us under 901. If you send it to a landfill, the landfill is the reporter. You send it to a compost facility, the compost facility is the reporter. If, on the other hand, you send your biosolids to an end use, again, you're the generator, you don't have to report, but the hauler who takes it there has to report. Now, if you're a wastewater treatment plant that also takes food waste from off-site, if you're a wastewater treatment plant that also has a compost facility on site and some of your biosolids go in there, but you also get food waste and chipped wood and straw from off-site, and you compost all of that together, well, now you have a compost operation, right? And so your wastewater treatment plant still doesn't have to report, but you have a compost operation, and your compost operation has to report. Compost operations report what leave their facility. So as a compost facility, you wouldn't say, I got biosolids from this wastewater treatment plant and I bought straw from this rice farmer, et cetera. You would just say, I sent out 100 tons of compost. Again, if you're big enough to meet the threshold for having to report, if you're just a tiny little operation that doesn't meet that threshold, then again, you would have no reporting obligation.
Thank you. And that, the example where, say, a wastewater plant does compost and co-compost with green waste, say, that final product that is then transported off-site to an end use is reported to US EPA. So I guess there's the coordination question again. But back earlier in your statement, if a wastewater plant produces biosolids, which they then directly land apply on agricultural land as a fertilizer, is that an end use which, I mean, that is also reported to EPA, but would that also then be reported to you?
Right. So to the first question, are we going to coordinate with US EPA on information being reported by wastewater treatment plants? We can look into it. My guess is probably that we won't be able to, just from experience on how data sharing between agencies, even within Cal EPA, I'm guessing it's probably just not going to work out very well. But like I say, we will look into it. We'll certainly attempt it. But to your other question, if a wastewater treatment plant generates biosolids and has it hauled to be directly land applied someplace. So as a wastewater treatment plant, you are the generator. The direct land applied location is the end use. So the reporting entity in that situation is the hauler. Even if that hauler is owned by the end user or by the wastewater treatment plant, the hauler has a reporting entity, has an obligation, assuming that the magnitude of that flow sort of rises to the level of having a reporting obligation.
Thank you very much.
And just to touch on the first part of the question about the coordination with US EPA and the reporting that you already do, that might be an interesting thing to share, like what kind of information do you report? And the same with other folks in relation to, we don't want to have, again, a separate tracking thing, but, if we can see, well, this is the kind of information that's required, and frequency and that kind of stuff, like how often you have to report and things like that, there might be some way that we can say, oh, well, it's basically this part of this form or that type of thing. So as opposed to inventing a whole new thing.
Right, and I'll
Send it to two directions.
right. I'll say when I said we weren't probably going to be able to coordinate, I did mean sort of more the direct sharing where you give it to EPA and then they give it to us. But to the extent that we can coordinate to make sure that sort of it's the same kind of information, that certainly is something that we can do. We probably have a few folks who've been waiting online, and then we can come back into the room. I know Larry's got a question.
So we have Connie Alday asking, after having an authorization to cancel form approved for a specific time period, do I then still need to obtain a verification of cancellation receipt from the broker, or is this form once approved enough?
Okay, so I think you're talking about DOR and the bottle bill program, which I'm unfortunately not perfectly fluent in. So what I would encourage you to do is shoot that question to me in an email, and I'll check in with our bottle bill folks to figure out exactly what that might mean. My thought, though, is that your obligations to the bottle bill DOR reporting would not be sort of changed based on your reporting obligations to 901. But again, I'm not really sure what those forms you're referencing are about. So send them to me in email, and we'll talk to the DOR folks and try to get an answer.
We have a few more.
Let's go to Larry, and then we'll go back online. Following up on the Costco question over there, and Chuck's question on flowcharts, the scenario you described to him on how he would report and not report is what I was thinking of as flowcharts. Giving more specific examples, because the ones I've seen so far in the packages are very cluttered, sort of global, but giving those sorts of analogies, and it could be anything, it could be sludge, it could be wood, it could be something else, that would help understand this a whole lot better.
Sure. Yeah, we'll try to expand them a bit. What we had in our last one was sort of the big, global, messy, ugly one, and then we tried to sort of give an example for each kind of group. Like if you're a landfill, this is how it works, and if you're a MRF, this is how it works. But again, a number of those are kind of messy because what MRFs and landfills do are kind of messy. There's just a lot going on. But we'll try to expand, particularly some of the specific examples where you have a lot of, this is your reporting obligation, and then also add some, and these aren't a reporting obligation, so that we get a couple of sort of exclusionary examples as opposed to just an inclusionary example to make it a little bit more clear.
Maybe have one for generator, what they do, one for MRF, one for processor, one for landfill, and just show what gets reported in there. And another thing that came up is, since people are sending all these reports, and some of you probably have never heard of before, I think it might be helpful with EPA report that he mentioned, getting a copy of that so you can see what he's already reporting. Maybe some of the other people like the nerds.
Yeah, we'd love to have copies of the information that's already being collected and reported to other agencies for other purposes. To expand on that one more, what we talked about fairly recently was potentially getting sort of your internal tracking structure. Like if it were a spreadsheet, the top line, the column headers, these are the data points that we collect on an everyday basis of all the material that comes in. So we can just see, we don't have to have the data associated with it at this point, but just we collect, name of company, we collect address, we collect total tons, we collect, billing cycle, we collect yards or whatever it happens to be. These are all the points that we're currently collecting. So that we can then look and say, okay, well, most people are collecting this data point, so we can probably feel comfortable that by asking for that data point, that's not going to represent an additional burden. Thank you for that. Let's go back online. I know we have a few folks who've been waiting, so let's see what we got there.
Deidre has her hand raised. Deidre, press *6.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to find out about exactly how the existing DRS regs are going to be modified by these new regs, because in looking at the draft regs, they're just, a set of sections that are without true references to show if those are amending which ones of the existing regs and which ones would not be changed. Yeah. And I ask that because of the language in AB 901 where it amends PRC section 41821.5G6 to read that nothing in the subdivision shall be construed to limit or expand the authority of a government entity that may have been provided by this section in implementing regs as they read on December 31st, 2015. So it's not intended to limit authority that existed in the existing regs.
Right. Okay. So to your first question, the plan is to replace the existing DRS regs with the new regs, rather than editing the existing regs to squeeze in the new language. Partially because it was just the whole structure was going to be changing, and it would have, I think, ultimately made everything messy and really hard to track. That being said, we did pull some stuff from the existing DRS regs and used some of that language in the new 901 regs when it made sense. And John looks like he's wanting to add something.
Yeah, functionally speaking, the things that change from the old DRS to this version that on the disposal tracking side are the material doesn't flow, the reports don't flow through the county. It's electronic reporting, and the addition of source sector in whatever iteration that comes out in the end. Those are the three major changes. The other changes to the regulations I don't think affect functionality. The approach on this set of regulations was more of a performance-based thing. You know, if you get us the information that we're requesting, we're not going to say what your signage has to be, or we're not going to say exactly how you have to do X, Y, or Z. We're just going to say at the end of the quarter, you have to get us this information. Please do what you need to do in order to make that happen.
And I'll maybe ask a follow-up question. It sounded, based on the way you phrased your question, that you were concerned that the way the new regs have been written, that they take away some authority that you had under DRS, the old DRS regs. And if that is in fact what you believe, if you could provide us with some specifics about which particular area you think have been left out, or some particular authority that you think we're leaving out of this new set of regs.
Yeah, for example, there's the current regs do require the landfills to make information available to jurisdictions upon request, and they alternatively can do it through the electronic system, you know, that is the state that creates for total tons of C&D debris and inert debris disposed, total tons of each type of designated waste disposed, total tons of disaster waste disposed. So these are kind of disposal waste type breakdowns that would be lost.
Okay, is that the only one, or are there others?
So that specifically was the one I was most concerned about. There's actually, I was still looking about residuals, because residual, allocation of residuals is another area that it doesn't seem is required in the new regs, and I was still looking in the old regs about where that citation is, but I know that it's often handled through disposal modifications, and were the residual allocations just built into this new reporting system, it would eliminate the burden of going through a disposal modification process to address that.
Thank you. I'd say that residual allocation is included in the new 901 regs. Not for every facility, but certainly for any MRF or transfer station, there is a requirement to allocate residuals to the jurisdiction of origin. The only facilities that wouldn't have to report jurisdiction of origin or allocate the residuals to jurisdiction of origin would be sort of the further up the line processors who are really not generating a huge amount of residuals. And certainly that would be information that you wouldn't be getting now under the old DRS regs, even with disposal modifications. John, did you want to add?
Yeah, and the provisions for the disposal modifications in relation to a regional diversion facility aren't covered specifically in the current DRS. It's more in the regulations around the electronic annual report and goal measurement in general. And so we're not changing anything in relation to regional diversion facility modifications or anything like that, if that's the concern.
Great, that's helpful.
Thanks, John. And we'll look into that first point as well and get back to you.
Thank you.
Let's take another one online and then come back into the room.
Question from Alberto Ramirez from Teacher Construction Materials. He says, I think Adam Harper from CalSEMA is raising our concern. Thanks. I don't know.
Oh, I think you're just saying that his question is covered.
I see. Thank you. I was confused.
Let's take a question. Let's take a question here in the room, and then we'll pop back online.
Thank you. Jim Dunbar with LizTech. We're a biosolids recycler, so I'm following up on the previous question about wastewater plants. A question with a follow-up. Wastewater plant that services multiple jurisdictions, located in a single jurisdiction, that has, say, its own hauler. So it is the hauler, so in other words, it is also the reporting party, right?
Right.
So it goes to a landfill, and the landfill will request point of origin.
If it goes to a landfill, then the hauler doesn't have to report.
No, but the landfill will be requesting source of origin
Information.
and they'll
correct.
give the jurisdiction of the treatment plant.
Correct.
Now, if that stops there, then the other jurisdictions that support that plant will get no credit for beneficial reuse unless there's a sub-reporting that says 50% came from jurisdiction A, 30% from jurisdiction B. Are you expecting that level of breakdown so that each jurisdiction that is serviced by the wastewater plant is reported somehow?
No. That's the very short answer, but I'll expand a little bit. For the way we measure jurisdiction progress in California for the 50% mandates for jurisdictions, it is based on the amount of disposal that's attributed to them. So as long as it's not disposed, it doesn't affect their diversion rate. So the fact that it goes to beneficial reuse means it's on the other side. It's on the diversion side of the aisle. And historically, we have said if at a wastewater treatment plant, the material that's coming into the facility through pipes is not a solid waste. It becomes a solid waste at the facility. So that is the source of generation. So you would attribute it to your host jurisdiction, not putting it all out. Now, if the jurisdictions that contribute say, well, we want to know about this and stuff like that, and they have agreements with you, and you can say, oh yeah, you're 40%, and they can brag about that. That's cool. But as far as the reporting goes, it's the host jurisdiction is where that material is generated, because that's where it becomes a solid waste. It's kind of like any manufacturing process where stuff happens and then there's waste that's generated. You don't charge it back to where the inputs for the manufacturing process came from.
Okay, and then if it does go for disposal, how does that change the reporting?
If it goes to disposal, you again would report the jurisdiction of origin as that host facility, and because that's where the solid waste is generated.
Right.
And
would you have to categorize it between residential, commercial, multi-family?
No. I mean, you would, in that it's in a big old truck, and it's stuff that wouldn't have come from a residential sector or multifamily. So I mean,
it's all commercial.
Yeah.
Basically.
Right, because again, you're the point of generation, right? You as the facility are the generator. So where do you fall in the category? If you're not a single family home, you're not a multifamily home, wastewater treatment plant, you're a commercial entity. So you're commercial. Got Larry.
Yeah. Even if CalRecycle doesn't want some of that information on disposal, I can assure you many jurisdictions will. Because if your host jurisdiction is getting all that tonnage attributed to disposal and it's coming from multiple jurisdictions, that host jurisdiction will not be very happy. And even if CalRecycle attributes it to them, they're going to put a footnote in their annual reports or something saying that that is not all our tonnage coming out of your facility. It's coming from other jurisdictions. And they're going to fight like crazy not to have that attributed all to them.
Thanks, Larry. What else do we have online?
From Kimberly Shibley. If there is no market for a material and it's landfilled, it seems that would be valuable information for CalRecycle. If it's reported as residual, it will be lost. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree completely. It would be fantastic if we were able to get that kind of information. For instance, if you bailed up a whole bunch of cardboard and it turns out you couldn't find anyone to buy it from you and you sent all those whole bales of cardboard to the landfill, we'd love to know that those are whole bales of cardboard going to the landfill. And
because they are supposed to report.
well, but if it's going for disposal.
I bet they're supposed to report on disposal.
Right. So, well, John and I are having a conversation here. John's not talking into the mic, I don't think. But so, and maybe you can correct me. But go ahead.
Well, my thought on it is that you've got the 4 categories: end use, export, other facilities, and then disposal. And on the recycling and composting side, on all 4 of those, you're supposed to report the material that you're sending to that destination. And so if it is bales of cardboard going to the landfill, I would say that you would report on bales of cardboard going to the landfill. Now, because that's part of the recycling and composting portion of the regulations. If you're talking about then when the truck gets to the landfill, and at that point it's just disposal. In the disposal side of things, we're not tracking by material. But for the residual side of things on the recycling and composting side, I would think that would be an option. But we have been talking about this quite a bit. So this is something for us to clarify amongst us as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. I have to say that was something that I hadn't particularly thought of in the past. And I'm glad that you spoke up, because as you were talking, I checked out the statute, and you're right. It does, in fact, specify that recycling facilities have to report the tons and type of material sent for disposal. So if you are sending, and I see your follow-up there, if you are sending plastics 3 through 7 to disposal because you can't find anyone to buy them for processing, then you would tell us that you're sending plastics 3 through 7 for disposal. And then separately, you would tell us tons of, say, mixed residuals that are going to disposal if you also have those coming out of your facility. So thank you for asking me that question. I think that's the last one online, so let's come back into the room.
Just one quick one. For a compost facility that's reported all of their inputs, when they use that compost, what level of specificity do they need to report in terms of where that compost is going?
All right, so first, compost facilities would not report what comes into their facility. So if wood waste or food or what have you comes into the compost facility, you don't report that. You only report what leaves your facility. So a compost facility, for the most part, makes compost. So they would report the total tons of compost that are going out of their facility to whoever they're going to. We had some discussion about the level of specificity necessary when a facility sends out to end users. As it's written now, you would tell us the name and address and phone number and DDRS number, if there is one, of whoever you're sending the material to. That is not necessarily something that we're wed to, particularly when it's going to end users. And with the circumstances around composters, there are a lot of small end users. And as we said in previous workshops, we don't want everybody who pulls up with a pickup truck and takes a half a ton of compost to have their name and address reported. So we're still in conversations about how much information we need about the transfers of material to end users, and some thoughts from folks. It's always welcome. If you just say it makes sense, anything over 100 yards at a time is a reportable flow, because that's a big chunk of the compost material stream in California. Anything less than that, we'll just call it too small to care about. Those kinds of things would be really fantastic. But as I say, the way it's written now, you tell us who you're sending it to, how much, and that it was compost. If you have disposal material, residuals, you screen out, and you're sending that offsite to a landfill, you would tell us that as well.
And just to clarify, thank you. On the feedstocks, the reason the composter doesn't report that is that that's reported by the hauler bringing that to them, right?
Well, it depends on how it gets there. If the material is being generated by a generator, right, and then it goes directly to a compost facility, then nobody reports that flow. It magically appears at the compost facility. But if the material is being generated and goes to a consolidation point, or it goes through a MRF or a transfer station, or it gets segregated and separated out, and then it goes to a compost facility, well, now that intermediary facility is a reporter, and they have to report all of the things that they do. They might be sending materials off for recycling, and they're sending materials off to a compost facility. Then they would report that flow. But if you've got a truck going around door to door and picking up residential green waste on a curbside, and you take it straight to a composting facility, nobody reports that flow. It's one of the, honestly, it's one of the concessions that we made to try to make the system a little bit easier for folks, realizing that you're probably not going to get a huge amount of long distance transport from generator to the first stop. And so we could probably reduce the burden on the regulated community and not lose a huge amount of useful information. Larry, you're furrowing your brow. So I have a feeling.
I'm just wondering, in that scenario where it's not being tracked, but that facility end up sending a lot of residuals to landfill, whoever's hosting that facility is going to get hit with that tonnage.
No, the compost facility, if they're sending enough residuals to landfill to have to report jurisdiction of origin, then they are on the hook for asking the hauler where it came from, just like a MRF would. If they're generating enough residuals to put them over the threshold, then now they have an obligation to make sure that their haulers are giving them certain information when they drop off material.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Great. Nothing else online? Anything else in the room? Larry, go ahead.
Two things that hadn't come up. Well, one. So this program has no new fees associated with it for people reporting. So I'm assuming all the cost is coming out of existing funds, the declining $1.40. But I can imagine there's going to be a significant cost of implementing and monitoring this program for staff and resources. Has there been an estimate of how much that is going to cost?
CalRecycle staff time, you mean?
Staff time, resources, computer development. I mean, there's a lot going into this.
No, the short answer, I suppose. CalRecycle didn't get any additional PYs with this legislation, and we didn't get any specific monies for anything. So yes, it's sort of coming out of being redirected from other fee streams.
And then the statute talks about the fines being deposited into the integrated waste management account, period. Is there any decision on where that funds are going to go?
So I'll have to check with folks about that, but my thought is that it's probably governed by some other piece of statute or regulation somewhere, but I really don't know. So let me check in with folks and see what I can find about what happens to the fines that get deposited into the integrated waste management account.
Maybe the last one is, you're requesting a lot of data points. A lot of us are probably working on a lot of information that'll fit into this and affect what's already written in the regulations. And then you've also mentioned this is going to be the last of the informal process. And I would urge you not to do that. I would urge to take the information we're going to work hard to get you and make another revision and let us look at that before you go to the formal rulemaking, because then once you're in the formal rulemaking, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a lot easier to work those things out now, as many other regulatory packets have found, than to take something this complex with so many things that still need to be done and not have another informal workshop. So I would highly encourage you to have another one after we've had a chance to look at a revision.
Thank you, and completely agree with you. You know, we had when we were planning the workshop, you know, we thought that it might be, but you know, we had always assumed that depending on the nature of the conversation that we had with folks during this workshop, that would really determine whether or not we're going to go into another set of informal workshops. We really wanted to leave the final decision on that point until we've spoken with everybody. And I think I agree with you that, you know, there's probably enough left over that we need another opportunity to talk with people about the regs before the formal rulemaking
Well,
starts.
and to twist arms a little bit, partly that depends on how much good input we get and how many good suggestions we get and how much changes are going to be generated from the kind of input that we get. If everybody walks away and doesn't give us any comments, then we don't have any place to go. We're less likely to do another informal round, but I think that
Having sat here for 3 days, I think you've already got a lot of input.
We have
more to come. So
Yeah.
I think that alone justifies another workshop.
Your mic's not actually on. If you could, thank you.
I agree with Larry. I know I've mentioned this before, but I think you have gotten a lot of good input, and I think these workshops have helped flush out some of the directions, so I think you will get some good input. I continue to be concerned about the people not in the room that don't know they're impacted, and I think that's a large percentage of folks. And again, I would just really request that you come up with that target list of reporting sectors or whatever you want to call it and publish that somewhere, and we will help you with some of that outreach. But there's a lot of people still not in the room that need to be here. So.
Appreciate that. You know, and this might be a good opportunity, as I mentioned the last time you brought the topic up. We're not entirely sure what, I don't know, we're doing wrong, I suppose. You know, we did pull, as I said, lists of pretty much anybody that reports to anywhere in CalRecycle or that we know about, you know, whether they're flaking plastic or pulping paper or smelting aluminum or composting or chipping and grinding or breaking asphalt or their C&D operator, pretty much anybody. And as I said, that list was about 3,500 long. And we wrote, you know, sent them emails saying these new regs are going to impact your business operations. Please participate. Here's how you can get involved. Here's how you can send information. Here's how you can get, you know, on the listserv. And we sent a couple of those sort of reminders. Hey, by the way. And then, you know, again, we did the same with these sort of industry folks, sort of thinking, well, maybe the operator, you know, the person who's sorting those steel or the plastic or who's pulping the paper, maybe they just don't have time, you know, they have a government relations person to do this for them. So let's go after their industry rep instead. So we looked and tried to find as many as we could in every industry that we could find, from plastic to paper to C&D to organics again. And we sent an email to them saying, hey, your member companies are going to be impacted by AB 901. Here's how to get involved, and here's how to get, you know, updated on how it works. And again, we'll go through the list of the people who were online, which, you know, were a fair number. But absent sort of just asking people to be involved, we're not sure what else we could do. Certainly, we might be missing the right people. But at the moment, we've exhausted, I think, the resources we have. So if you folks have contacts or other people, or maybe, you know, they'll listen to an email from you, but, you know, this one from who knows who from CalRecycle, you know, they don't know who I am, and so they get this email and they just throw it away. You know, maybe that's the way to go. That would be helpful.
Just to close out on this, I think you guys have done a great job of doing the outreach. I think that there are a couple of challenges that we just all face. I think that the legislation wasn't envisioned the way that it's being discussed totally. And I think Chuck and others could speak to this better than myself. In the legislature, a lot of the affected parties weren't really participants in the legislation. So that's sort of where the beginning of it is. And then I think that the actual workshops have created a conversation. I know on the compost side, like in Diamond Bar, there were a lot of questions about, gee, are we impacted? So a lot of people then went back after that and said, gee, we're a broker, we're an end user, we're a manufacturer, you know, we're kind of all the pieces of it. And so there's still some confusion. That's why I think the next step before another workshop would be to really define, once you put it on paper, that your sector is impacted, that changes how people perceive it in the real world out there and start reacting. And then I'm going to connect you with a couple of broader trade association groups that can reach all the sectors, because I don't know all of who they are, but sitting here and having participated in all the workshops, I can just assure you that they're not all in the room. So,
oh yeah, we've noticed the conspicuous groups sort of missing in the previous workshops, which is why I say we did spend a fair amount of time trying to get them in, but certainly very very helpful, you know, to help out with that. And we'll look at getting you know, more of a discrete list of folks. Part of it, I think, is just a sort of language thing, because you know, as we talk about this, about materials in, materials out, to be able to say you will certainly be in is premature. So I think it's just a matter of the language of, you know, it's very likely that your industry is going to be involved, and having that up. You know, I'm sure we can find a place on the website where we can put a list like that so that people can see that. And then we've got a question here or a comment.
One more comment. I think it's important, like she said, to contact the trade associations, but to also use the local assistant market representatives from CalRecycle to go out to the local task force and kind of present this information to them as well, because you'll capture a lot of those people that will be impacted.
Yeah, we've definitely touched in with that group, and they've been including, you know, sort of reminders in their listservs and in their communication with people, and we're trying to take advantage of the opportunities to go out and actually talk with people when we have options to do that, whether you know, be in person or via webinar, telephone, or something. You know, we can't go to all of them, but we do try when the opportunities come up. And some folks, I know Larry, we've been to speak with you guys a couple of times. But you know, we'll definitely continue working with the folks in LAMD to make sure that we're touching base with as many people as we can. Anything online?
Yeah, Deidre, did you want to pitch in?
Sorry about that. Yes. I wanted to see if there's a place in the AB 901 regs where it specifies that the disposal facility operators must submit the information about disposal tonnages by origin to counties upon request, because I saw that was also specified in the legislation.
Deirdre, I'm sorry, you're just quite faint. If you could either put the headset closer to your mouth or...
Let me try and make this phone act right. Sorry. The AB 901 calls for disposal facility operators to provide information to counties if requested with respect to the tonnage and by origin. And I didn't see anything like that in the draft AB 901 regs. Was I missing something?
Okay, so the statute requires disposal facilities to provide information to counties on request on the jurisdiction of origin, and you're wondering whether or why that's not in the regulations. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I think first, I'm going to have to just take a peek at the statute and see what exactly it says so that I can respond a little bit better. John looks like he's got...
Yeah, it's in A. It's in subsection A of the 41821.5.
Yes, and because we're talking about an electronic system, we can clarify something. We can put something clarifying in the regulations, but because we're talking about an electronic reporting system, I think we were also envisioning it as when that information is submitted, it can be emailed out to emailed to the county at the same time if the county's requested to be in the loop. It also will be accessible to the county as soon as the facilities submit the information on the disposal side.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anything else in the room? I don't see any hands up. Anything else online? Nothing. Okay. Well, oh, Larry. Sneak one in at the end.
No, Kathy just told me to have the last word. But
don't you always?
This has been helpful. Still have a lot of major concerns, as you've heard, but I can definitely say we're not as paranoid as we were, but there's still a lot of concerns.
Great. Glad you're not as paranoid as you used to be.
Yeah, we know we've got some work to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I'm just going to close out. I appreciate everybody taking the time to come. Again, I know this is a big dedication of your time and energy to sit through these workshops, to spend time looking at the regulations and give us meaningful feedback. So I really do appreciate that. Looking at next steps, we have finished our workshops. We're going to take the questions and comments we received, both in person as well as written. Again, we're asking for those comments to be submitted by September 12th because we would like to get a revised draft out to folks. And then, you know, we will be beginning the formal rulemaking process as soon as feasible. But again, the exact timeline is going to depend on how much we're making changes and future conversations with everybody. And whether or not we end up having another set of informal workshops, certainly. Contact information, you've all seen it before. Please at least copy the 901 mailbox, but feel free to send an email to me personally. And then please sign up for the listserv. And as we mentioned, send the link out to everybody you know who you think might be involved, or and just give them a quick note. You know, it oftentimes comes off better from people that they know. So if you know somebody who hasn't been around or might not know, just send out a mass email to all the people you think might want this with a link to the listserv and a copy of the regs and say, this affects you or it might affect you. Get involved. That would be really helpful for us. And Kathy, you got your hand up. So the question is whether September 12th is a hard deadline. Well, so we try to set sort of intermediate deadlines so that we have a point where we can say, okay, we've got the comments and we can finish our next draft. But it's soft in the sense that we're going to be continuing to work on this beyond the 12th. So we really are hoping to get comments by the 12th so that we can get the next draft out. But if we receive comments after the 12th, we'll still consider them. It just might not make it into that next version of the draft. All right, thanks again, everybody. Safe travels home.